Everybody thought it was just another royal squabble. A tense smile here, an awkward photograph there, perhaps a disagreement over a bridesmaid's dress. The sort of thing that should disappear after one cup of tea and a carefully worded apology. But 8 years later, the story of Catherine and Meghan still refuses to leave the room. It has survived weddings, babies, funerals, interviews, memoirs, illnesses, a move across the Atlantic, and enough anonymous palace sources to fill Wembley Stadium. Every few months, a new report declares that peace is finally possible. Then another source appears to say the door is firmly shut. At this point, the door has opened and closed more often than the entrance to a Greggs at lunchtime. So what really keeps Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, apart? Is it one argument that was never properly resolved? Is it the rivalry between their husbands? Is it a clash of personalities? Or did two women who were never especially close become symbols in a much bigger war that neither of them could control? That last possibility may be the most important one, because this is no longer simply a story about whether two sisters-in-law like each other. It is a story about the old monarchy and the new celebrity economy, about privacy and publicity, duty and independence, silence and self-explanation. One woman remained inside the institution and learned to speak through appearances, gestures, and carefully chosen causes. The other left the institution and began speaking in her own voice, through interviews, television, business ventures, and personal storytelling. They are not merely standing on opposite sides of a family disagreement. In the public imagination, they have come to represent opposite worlds. And once that happens, even a tiny moment can become evidence in a trial that never ends. To understand how we reached this point, we have to go back to 2018, when the royal story still looked very different. Prince Harry and Meghan were newly married. William and Catherine were already established as the future king and queen. The four of them were promoted as a modern royal dream team. The British press called them the Fab Four, a nickname so optimistic that, in hindsight, it feels like putting up the Christmas decorations in August. On paper, the arrangement looked perfect. William was the heir's heir, steady and familiar. Catherine had spent years learning the rhythms of royal life. Harry was the popular younger brother, informal and charismatic. Meghan arrived with an acting career, a global profile, and the promise of a fresh audience. They appeared together, spoke about shared charitable ambitions, and smiled for the cameras. But the very idea of the Fab Four contained a problem. It assumed that four adults with different roles, temperaments, expectations, and futures would naturally operate as one cheerful unit. Most families struggle to agree on where to eat dinner. This family had to agree on hierarchy, staff, publicity, money, duty, national expectations, and who stood where on a balcony while half the planet watched. No pressure then. By late 2018, the tone had changed. Reports described tension between Meghan and Catherine. One story said Catherine had been left in tears after a fitting for Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress before Harry and Meghan's wedding. Other stories focused on staff, etiquette, personality differences, and the Sussexes' decision to move from Kensington Palace to Frogmore Cottage. The details varied, but the shape of the narrative was always the same. Two duchesses, one palace, and a rivalry waiting to explode. Some reports were challenged almost immediately. Buckingham Palace made the unusual move of denying a claim that Catherine had confronted Meghan over the treatment of staff, issuing the blunt response, "This never happened." Other coverage at the time suggested that any deeper tension was between William and Harry, not their wives. Some commentators argued that Catherine and Meghan were simply different people who had never become best friends. That explanation was less dramatic, but probably more recognizable. Plenty of sisters-in-law are cordial without spending Sunday morning swapping voice notes. Not every polite distance is a blood feud. Sometimes, two people simply would not choose the same table at the pub quiz. Yet the feud story had already acquired momentum. Once the public was encouraged to read every photograph as evidence, ordinary behavior became suspicious. If Catherine and Meghan stood close together, they were putting on a performance. If they stood apart, the feud was confirmed. If they smiled, the smiles were forced. If they did not smile, apparently civilization itself was ending before the second hymn. This is one reason the story has lasted. It is almost impossible to disprove. A denial can be called damage control. A friendly appearance can be called staged. Silence can be treated as hostility. The narrative consumes every possible response and turns it into fresh material. Royal reporting has always operated in the gap between what the institution shows and what the public wants to know. The palace offers ceremony, carefully arranged photographs, and short statements. The press wants motive, emotion, and conflict. When official information is scarce, anonymous sources rush in to fill the space. Some may be informed, others may be repeating gossip. Some stories may contain a grain of truth wrapped in several layers of theatrical seasoning. And Britain does love seasoning when the dish is royal drama. Give the nation a cold bank holiday weekend, a kettle, and one unexplained Duchess facial expression, and by Monday morning, somebody will have produced a 12-page psychological profile. Still, dismissing the entire story as pure invention would be too easy. We know that the relationships within the family did deteriorate. Harry and Meghan separated their household from William and Catherine's. In early 2020, the Sussexes stepped back as senior working royals. They moved to North America. Their disagreements with the institution became public. The distance was no longer something inferred from body language at Wimbledon. It was geographical, professional, and deeply personal. The famous bridesmaid story also returned in a completely different form. In the 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan said the earlier account had been reversed. According to Meghan, it was Catherine who had upset her, not the other way around. Meghan also said Catherine later apologized and sent flowers, and she described Catherine as a good person. Kensington Palace did not publicly enter into a point-by-point dispute over that account. That moment should have made the story simpler. Instead, it made it even more complicated. Now the public had competing narratives. The original press reports said Meghan made Catherine cry. Meghan said the reverse happened, and that Catherine apologized. A royal biography published in 2020 had argued that there were no tears at the fitting at all, and that the women were never truly at war. They simply did not know each other very well. 3 versions, 1 dress, and no chance of getting everyone into the same room with a whiteboard. But the emotional force of Meghan's interview did not depend only on who cried. Her larger argument was that the palace had allowed a damaging story about her to spread, while she was unable to defend herself. To Meghan and her supporters, the bridesmaid episode became proof of unequal protection. The key question was not whether Catherine had been emotional during a stressful wedding week. The key question was why one woman was publicly cast as the aggressor and the other as the victim. For Catherine's supporters, however, the interview created a different injury. Catherine could not respond in the same way, without breaking the conventions of the role she had spent years learning. Meghan was able to tell her story in a global television interview. Catherine remained inside a system famous for saying very little. To that audience, Meghan had taken a private disagreement and placed it before millions of viewers, knowing that the other person was unlikely to answer. This is the trap at the center of the feud. Meghan sees silence as a structure that left her exposed. Catherine's position depends on that very silence. For one woman, speaking is self-defense. For the other, not speaking is part of the job. Imagine trying to resolve a family dispute when even the method of resolving it is disputed. One side wants the truth said out loud. The other side believes dignity means handling it privately. It is like arranging a peace conference between a podcast studio and a handwritten note on palace stationery. Then there are the husbands. The story is usually marketed as Catherine versus Meghan because female rivalry is easy to package. 2 dresses, 2 smiles, 2 duchesses. The headline practically writes itself. But the deeper fracture has always involved William and Harry. They are brothers shaped by the same extraordinary childhood, the same public loss, and very different futures. William grew up knowing the crown was waiting for him. Every major decision could be measured against duty, continuity, and the institution he would one day lead. Harry grew up beside the heir, essential to the family but not destined for the same role. For years, their closeness made that arrangement appear manageable. But closeness is not the same as equality, and affection does not erase hierarchy. When Meghan entered Harry's life, he reportedly felt protective of her and increasingly frustrated with the press and the palace machinery. William, according to accounts discussed publicly over the years, urged caution. What one brother may have considered sensible concern, the other may have experienced as condescension or rejection. Once their trust began to break, every disagreement involving their wives carried extra weight. Harry's role is especially complicated because he has been both participant and narrator. He has criticized the institution, described private family moments, and also spoken about wanting reconciliation. In his memoir, Spare, he wrote warmly about Catherine as the sister he had always wanted. He also described moments of tension between Catherine and Meghan, including an awkward request to borrow lip gloss and the text exchanges surrounding the bridesmaid dresses. Those details humanized the story, but they also made peace harder. A disagreement can fade when only 4 people remember it. It becomes something else when it is printed, translated, clipped for social media, debated on breakfast television, and stored forever in the world's search engines. Harry appears caught between 2 impulses. He wants his experiences acknowledged, but he also wants a relationship with his family. He wants to protect Meghan, but he retains emotional ties to the people and the world he left behind. He can see himself as a bridge, yet every public revelation may remove another plank from that bridge. That does not mean reconciliation is impossible. Families survive terrible arguments all the time, but royal reconciliation is not a normal Sunday lunch, where Uncle Dave apologizes, someone burns the roast potatoes, and everybody agrees not to mention Brexit. Here, a private conversation has political symbolism, commercial value, security implications, and a press pack waiting outside. Even the location matters. A meeting in Britain could be interpreted as the Sussexes returning to the royal fold. A meeting in California could be interpreted as the Waleses entering Meghan and Harry's world. A photograph would be analyzed. No photograph would create rumors. If they had tea, someone would ask who poured it. If they did not have tea, the United Kingdom might have to call a constitutional emergency. This is why the latest reconciliation stories should be treated carefully. Recent reports have claimed that Harry wants Meghan to contact Catherine and clear the air. Other reports say King Charles hopes the 2 women can help thaw the wider family freeze, particularly as preparations continue for the 2027 Invictus Games in Birmingham. The logic is clear enough. Catherine has William's trust. Meghan has Harry's. If the wives could establish a calmer relationship, perhaps the brothers would have more room to move. But these remain reports based on unnamed sources. There has been no publicly confirmed summit, no joint announcement, and no reliable sign that one private conversation has suddenly solved 8 years of accumulated mistrust. The palace has not unveiled a peace treaty next to the crown jewels. The royal family is not yet gathering on the Buckingham Palace lawn for trust falls. And perhaps that is just as well. If reconciliation ever happens, the first useful step would almost certainly be invisible. No cameras, no streaming deal, no friend briefing a newspaper before the kettle has boiled. just a private conversation with no immediate demand for public proof. The problem is that privacy itself has become one of the disputed territories. From the palace perspective, confidentiality is essential. Private family discussions cannot function if every sentence might later appear in an interview or memoir. From Harry and Meghan's perspective, silence has too often allowed other people to define them through leaks and anonymous commentary. Each side believes its preferred method is protection. Each side experiences the other method as a threat. That creates a brutal cycle. The palace says little because it does not trust what will become public. The Sussexes speak because they do not trust what is being said in their absence. Their public explanations make the palace more guarded. The palace's guarded behavior makes the Sussexes feel more justified in explaining. Round and round it goes, like the M25 with better tailoring. Catherine and Meghan are central to this cycle, but they did not invent it. Long before either woman met her prince, royal women were compared, ranked, praised, and punished, according to whatever role the culture needed them to play. One becomes the dutiful one, another the rebel. One is elegant, another is ambitious. One is authentic, another is calculating. The labels change, depending on the audience, but the contest remains. The comparison is irresistible because the contrasts are real. Catherine entered royal life gradually. She met William at university, lived through years of public scrutiny, married him in 2011, and developed her role within established boundaries. Her public style is controlled and consistent. She rarely comments on personal controversy. Her power comes partly from continuity. She is seen over time doing the work expected of a future queen. Meghan entered at speed. She had an established career, a public voice, and experience communicating directly with an audience. She joined a centuries-old institution in the age of Instagram, podcasts, streaming platforms, and personal brands. She appeared to expect that hard work, clear ideas, and direct communication could produce change quickly. When that collided with a system built around hierarchy and precedent, the culture shock was enormous. Neither approach is automatically virtuous or villainous. Patience can be discipline, but it can also preserve unhealthy systems. Disruption can create progress, but it can also cause damage. Silence can be dignified, or it can be suffocating. Speaking out can be brave, or it can make private repair more difficult. The uncomfortable truth is that several of these things can be true at once. But nuance is terrible business for a feud industry. The feud industry needs teams. Team Catherine sees a woman who accepted the constraints of royal duty, protected her family, and endured public pressure without turning every grievance into content. Team Meghan sees a woman who entered a hostile environment, faced relentless and often prejudiced coverage, and refused to disappear quietly when the system failed to protect her. Once people choose a team, new information is rarely evaluated on its own. It is recruited. A fashion choice becomes a coded message. A missed event becomes a snub. A kind statement becomes strategic. A business launch becomes revenge. A balcony appearance becomes victory. This is less like reporting and more like football commentary, except nobody knows the score and the referee is an anonymous courtier. The women themselves then become characters rather than people. Catherine is flattened into either a saint or an ice queen. Meghan is flattened into either a courageous modernizer or a calculating opportunist. Both versions are convenient. Neither is large enough to contain a real human being. That may be the cruelest part of the entire story. The public asks whether Catherine and Meghan can see each other clearly, while rarely seeing either of them clearly ourselves. Consider how much of the feud has been built from tiny fragments, a facial expression, a seating plan, a second-hand recollection, a delayed birthday message, a choice of words in a statement. None of those fragments is meaningless. In families, Small gestures matter, but fragments are not the same as a complete picture. We do not know the full content of their private conversations. We do not know which apologies were offered, which were accepted, or which never came. We do not know whether either woman wants a friendship, or merely a workable peace. We do not know whether the latest reports reflect genuine movement, or the royal media's permanent need for a new episode. What we do know is that the original fantasy was probably unrealistic. Catherine and Meghan did not have to become best friends simply because they married brothers. The demand that they instantly form a glamorous sisterhood placed an extraordinary burden on two women with little in common beyond the family they joined. When that fantasy failed, the culture replaced it with another fantasy, the eternal duel. There was almost no room between inseparable sisters and sworn enemies. Yet that middle ground is where most adult relationships live. They may have liked one another at times, misunderstood each other at others, and been pulled further apart by conflicts that began elsewhere. They may both feel wronged. They may remember the same moments differently. They may not hate each other at all. Distance can be the result of exhaustion, caution, loyalty to a spouse, or the simple conclusion that contact causes more trouble than it solves. That is not as exciting as a palace showdown, but it is far more believable. The question, then, is not whether Catherine and Meghan can suddenly become the Fab Four's missing best friends again. That era is gone. The real question is whether the wider family can build a new relationship that does not require anyone to pretend the past never happened. For Harry, that would mean accepting that reconciliation cannot be forced on his preferred timetable. A public wish for peace does not automatically restore private trust. If he wants to act as a mediator, he may first need to stop treating mediation as a message to be announced. For the palace, it would mean recognizing that silence is not always neutral. When hostile stories spread and the institution refuses to respond, the person being targeted may experience that silence as abandonment. Never complain, never explain sounds splendid embroidered on a cushion. It is considerably less comforting when your name is on every front page. For Meghan, any private outreach would require confidence that the conversation would not be used to discipline or contain her. It might also require accepting that Catherine cannot publicly validate every part of Meghan's account without creating a fresh institutional crisis. And for Catherine, engagement would require confidence that a private gesture would remain private and would not later be presented as proof that one side had been right all along. She would have to separate the person from the years of public conflict surrounding that person, which is easier said than done when the conflict involves your husband, your children, and the future role you are preparing to occupy. This is not a job for one dramatic lunch. It is a job for boundaries, patience, and perhaps the most securely locked family WhatsApp group in human history. King Charles may have strong reasons to want movement. He is not only a father managing a painful division between his sons, he is the monarch responsible for the public image of the institution. A visibly fractured family weakens the picture of continuity the monarchy depends upon. There is also the personal question of contact with grandchildren who live thousands of miles away. But even a king cannot command emotional trust. He can create an opportunity. He can encourage a meeting. He can invite people into the same space. He cannot issue a royal warrant requiring everyone to feel safe, understood, and ready to move on by 4:30. The approaching Invictus Games in Birmingham offer the media a natural stage for reunion speculation. Invictus is one of Harry's most respected achievements, and royal participation could provide a shared cause larger than the family quarrel. Yet it could also place huge pressure on an event designed to honor wounded, injured, and sick service personnel. If a reunion happened there, the royal drama might swallow the very purpose of the occasion. That is the paradox of every possible peace gesture. The bigger the gesture, the more attention it attracts. The more attention it attracts, the more difficult sincere repair becomes. Perhaps the most hopeful path is also the least cinematic. Not friendship, not a grand embrace, but a ceasefire. A private agreement about communication. A commitment not to escalate. Civil contact at important family events. Respect for the relationships between grandparents and grandchildren. No demand that Catherine and Meghan perform closeness for the cameras. It would disappoint anyone expecting the final episode of a prestige drama. There would be no orchestral music, no slow walk across a palace corridor, no corgi looking wisely into the middle distance. But real peace often looks boring from the outside. That is one way you know it might actually be real. Of course, the story may continue precisely because the public does not want boring peace. The royal family functions as a national soap opera with constitutional paperwork. Viewers inherit favorite characters, debate motives, remember old betrayals, and return whenever a new season begins. Catherine and Meghan give that drama a perfect visual contrast. Palace and California. Continuity and reinvention. The future queen and the duchess who walked away. They have become screens onto which millions of people project their own beliefs about marriage, ambition, race, class, tradition, motherhood, and female power. People are not only arguing about two famous women, they are arguing about what a woman should endure, when she should speak, whom she should protect, and what she owes an institution that gives her status while demanding obedience. That is why the story does not die when one rumor is debunked. The rumor is only the spark. The fuel comes from much larger cultural arguments. It is also why there may never be a satisfying final verdict. Catherine's supporters are unlikely to forget the interviews and revelations. Meghan's supporters are unlikely to forget the press coverage and the palace silence. William and Harry carry their own history, pain, and responsibilities. Every new attempted contact must cross a field crowded with old headlines. So, after 8 years, what really keeps Catherine and Meghan apart? Not one dress, not one lip gloss, not one frosty look caught by a telephoto lens. Those moments became famous because they were simple symbols for a conflict that was never simple. What keeps them apart is broken trust across an entire family. It is the clash between institutional silence and personal testimony. It is the loyalty each woman has to her husband. It is the enormous commercial and emotional machine that turns uncertainty into content. It is the fact that both women now represent identities much bigger than themselves, and any movement by either one will be interpreted as surrender by somebody. Most of all, it is time. 8 years of distance creates habits. People build separate lives, separate teams, separate explanations. The longer a conflict continues, the less it is about the original event, and the more it becomes part of everyone's identity. Eventually, nobody is guarding the first wound. They are guarding the walls they built around it. But walls are not destiny. If there is ever a genuine reconciliation, it will probably begin when Catherine and Meghan are allowed to stop symbolizing rival kingdoms and start being two imperfect people with different memories of a difficult period. They do not need to agree on every detail. They do not need to become friends. They do not need matching bracelets, a lifestyle series, or a surprise joint appearance at the Chelsea Flower Show. They only need enough trust to believe that the next private conversation will not become the next public weapon. Until then, the palace will continue doing what the palace does best, presenting calm, continuity, and a very impressive amount of polished silver. Harry and Meghan will continue building their life in America and telling their story on their own terms. Anonymous sources will continue arriving with urgent updates from somewhere near a palace corridor, and the rest of us will continue asking whether peace is finally around the corner. Maybe it is. Maybe the latest reports are the first faint sign that everyone understands how much has been lost. Or maybe this is simply another turn of the royal news cycle, another promise of a reunion that exists only in headlines. For now, the most honest answer is that we do not know. And perhaps that uncertainty is the secret of the story's extraordinary life. A confirmed friendship would end the feud. A confirmed permanent break would end the suspense. But silence leaves the door open just enough for hope, suspicion, and one more anonymous quote. The British monarchy has survived wars, abdications, scandals, and centuries of family tension. It can certainly survive two sisters-in-law who are not close. The more difficult question is whether the people inside this particular conflict can find a form of peace that does not require a winner. Because after all the tears, denials, interviews, books, briefings, and balcony calculations, victory would be a strange prize. Catherine cannot defeat Meghan without deepening Harry's separation from the family. Meghan cannot defeat Catherine without confirming the palace's fear that private conflict will always become public. Harry cannot force a reunion without making it feel less sincere. William cannot protect the institution by pretending the emotional damage does not exist. The only real victory would be the moment the story becomes too dull to publish. No dramatic leak, no coded outfit, no friend of a friend announcing that talks are imminent. Just two branches of a family finding a way to occupy the same world without turning every encounter into a referendum on the monarchy. It may not happen soon. It may never look warm. But peace does not always arrive wearing a crown. Sometimes it is simply the decision to put down the old story, close the group chat, and let the tea go cold. And in this family, that might be the most revolutionary ending of all.